Welcome to Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here is the podcast host, James Delingpole.
Welcome to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very special guest, Daniel Kawczynski, MP. Now, I had not encountered Daniel until about 3 weeks ago? So I'm really hoping that he's going to be as sound as I suspect he's going to be. Now, the reason that I was excited to meet him, because he was, I think, the only MP at a meeting I attended in the House of Commons in London, which was, what was it about? It was Durham University students, was that the idea?
Yes, the Durham University students and also elements of the Bow Group.
That's right, the Bow Group, yes. Who are the sound element of the Tory party, aren't they, I think?
Yes, absolutely. And there was an alternative. There was, that evening, either spending the evening with Conservative MPs at the 1922 reception, or come to meet these students. And I instinctively wanted to meet the students. I'm actually very, very excited at bubbling up amongst the next generation of young people in this country who are from right of centre, who believe in right of centre politics. There's a lot of energy and enthusiasm and vibrant ideas coming from them, and I wanted to listen to what they have to say.
Yeah, you're talking about, I suppose, Generation Z or Generation Z, because I don't know about you, I have completely written off the millennials. They're very good at making sourdough bread, making kimchi, making craft beer, growing beards. They're very good at that. But they seem to be less good on understanding what it is that underpins a Western economy, which is free markets. And I'm not sure they really get that. Too many of them and the generation just below, I think, are sold on sold on Corbynism. Whereas Generation Z, who are the ones who are at university now, they say, I wonder if this man's from Generation Z. Are you Generation Z?
Well, he is our actually American intern.
Okay.
And he's only 20 years of age, so yes.
That's the right generation. So are you pro-Trump?
No.
He's never Trumper. Oh my goodness.
Oh dear, I didn't know
Worse.
that when we gave you... No.
No, I wouldn't have given him the job, Daniel. That's a real shock. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, that goes and disproves our point, doesn't it, before we've started?
I shall have a word with him afterwards.
Yeah. Better discipline him. So, yeah, we were both at this meeting, and I was looking around the room and listening to these kids saying really, really sound things. They actually got conservatism. And I was kind of wary I'm wary about talking to MPs generally, because what I find is that they all become career safe when the microphone is in front of them. I mean, the only exception I can think of so far, and you may prove me wrong, Jacob Rees-Mogg, he absolutely speaks his mind. I've never known him duck a question. And I wish more MPs were like that.
Well, Jacob, I first came across Jacob at a Conservative Party conference many years ago when he was trying to get onto the candidates list. And of course, the rumour at that time was that the party hierarchy was trying to prevent him even from getting onto the candidates list. I don't think they've ever fully understood how to manage Jacob Rees-Mogg. He has the intellect and the confidence and the vision and the courage and the decency to be able to speak freely. And he's not one of the reason he's so refreshing, he's not one of these careerist politicians who, when they get here, all they want to do is climb up the greasy pole. And there are a lot of colleagues who are very, very, very focused on that career progression within their parliamentary careers. Jacob Rees-Mogg, he's on a different level. And I remember having lunch with him many, many years ago before he became a Member of Parliament. And even then, I realised that this was a sort of once-in-a-generation figure who will excite and enthrall and motivate vast sections of young right-of-centre people who are yearning for that real, authentic, pure version of what they believe in, which is economic liberalism, free trade, low taxation, low regulation, all the things that the socialists want to prevent us from doing. And they try to defame our principles by saying, once we're out of the European Union, we're going to become some sort of bargain basement type, Singapore type offshore sort of society. Nothing could be further from the truth. And if you listen to Rees-Mogg and the sort of policies that he's propagating, the sort of prosperity that can be generated from a sort of society like that is mind-blowing.
Yeah. Who do you think what era are we talking about? Who would have been the Conservative hierarchy at the time who would have tried to stop him? We're talking about sort of central office, or?
Well,
you can't name names.
You're very good. You're very good. Look, I think it was right at the top. People right at the top didn't want him, and I think even.
So, who was at the top at the time when he came? Was it Cameron?
Well, yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Well, that's the rumor. The rumor.
Look, and there you have both were at Eton, but Cameron is the wrong kind of Etonian in my view, and Jacob is the right kind. Eton, I think, produces the best and the worst.
Yes, but don't forget, even now, I mean, Theresa May was asked the question on LBC or some radio program, when are you going to make Jacob Rees-Mogg a minister? And it was the longest and most nervous laugh that came back. I don't think they realise they don't know what they've got and they don't know how to handle him. I think they're almost sort of like unprepared for his intellectual rigour. This is a man who, watch his interview with Ali G, and contrast that in the way that he handled Ali G, in stark contrast to the way Mr. Trump handled Ali G. Rees-Mogg actually went through the entire interview and got Ali G on side and buying into what he was saying. Yeah. Trump, after a few seconds, stormed out. And Rees-Mogg, whether it's confronting demonstrators at a university, whether it's dealing with Ali G, whether it's actually standing up for some things which are really difficult and controversial, this is a man whose authenticity shines through because he's not frightened for standing up for the things that he believes in. And let me just say this to you. I've heard conservatives, some even people who I know very intimately, who complain to me that his views on abortion and his views on same-sex marriage make him out of kilter with the norm in the United Kingdom, which will therefore prevent him ever from standing to be leader of the Conservative Party, and that those views are so out of date and abhorrent that, and this on top of the fact that he has a plummy voice and went to Eton and all the rest of it, and that he wears double-breasted suits, etc., yep, make him undesirable, that he will not resonate with the so-called centre ground. I can't think of anything further away from the truth. People in this country are sick and tired of the glitzy, managed, managerial-esque type politicians who are steered in certain directions by, popular opinion polls or pundits or their advisors. They want somebody with that genuine strain of authenticity. And I think that he would make a tremendously good Secretary of State in the Cabinet. And ultimately, I very much hope that he will stand to be leader of the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party needs that reinvigoration every generation. And I think he could bring that about.
Yeah, you sound like a fan.
I am, and I'm unashamedly a fan because, of course, the last election, we had an election completely sprung on us. Mr. Cameron, a few days after the referendum, said, right, that's it, I'm off. And the whole election campaign was concertinaed into a very, very short period. And we didn't, as a party, actually have that opportunity to have a really robust and extended dialogue and discussion and debate about what sort of party we want and what's the direction that we want the party to go in. Now we know that eventually, although I have every confidence in the Prime Minister, eventually, either before this election or after the next one, whenever it is, she will ultimately want to retire because she will then be in her mid-60s. to late 60s. We want to now start to plan the future of the Conservative Party and what sort of leader we want. And I think Rees-Mogg is certainly one of the contenders. I'm going to be speaking at a public meeting with him on May the 14th in front of many young party activists at a venue in London, and I'm very excited about it. And those people who do in a derogatory way say the Member of Parliament for the 19th century, my goodness me, if we had a fraction of the global influence as a nation that we did in the 19th century, I would be quite satisfied with that.
I'm with you there. I would be very happy for us to be in the 19th century again. We were a great power. We had the tax rate in the early part of the 19th century was, I think, between 10 and 15%. And there was a lot more philanthropy. People felt compelled morally to spend the fruits of their profits on founding hospitals, schools, etc. They were better times.
And of course, it is the antithesis of the so-called cool Britannia that Mr. Blair and his acolytes tried to sell to the British people. No, I think Mr. Rees-Mogg, if he was ever to be leader of the Conservative Party, the way his stature, the way he conducts himself, ultimately on the international stage, would create a real interest in the United Kingdom. I think when I go to Warsaw, people think of the British as, tell you what the Poles think of the British.
Oh, yeah.
And it's no different to really what many other countries around the world think of the British. And I'm speaking as the first Polish-born British Member of Parliament, so I'm a hybrid, I'm an Anglo-Pole. They think of the British as straight, hard-working, straight in the sense that honest, hard-working, play by rules, and you can trust the British. You can sign a contract with the British which they will adhere to. There are a lot of very positive attributes about Britain, the British way, British standards, the British brand, the way that Britain conducts itself. And he, I think more than any other Member of Parliament in the current parliamentary party, exudes and accentuates those characteristics which many people around the world think about us. They think about us in a very positive way, but because we're British, we tend to hide our light under a bushel.
Yeah. I was thinking that the Jacob occupies the space that would formerly have been occupied by Boris and, to an extent, Gove. And Gove is still pretty popular. But I think that both those fine chaps have been compromised by being in government, haven't they? I think inevitably they start sort of finessing their positions in order to kind of adjust to the regime. Well,
I don't want to say anything overtly negative about Boris Johnson or Michael Gove. I actually voted for Michael Gove.
Well, they are. I mean, look. Let's be fair. They are the two best chaps in the cabinet by miles. I mean, they are. So let's not diss them. I agree. But
no, and I think both of them played a critical role. They will have their place in history in the sense that, let's not forget, they played a critical role in ensuring that the Conservative Party did not just kowtow to Cameron and Osborne's diktat of us campaigning to remain in the European Union. I can imagine the sort of pressure when you think about the sort of not coercion, but certainly, it was seen as, we were being told that this was right for Britain and that we should get behind the Prime Minister and that maybe disloyal, etc., etc. He's brought back a marvellous renegotiation, which we can then sell to our constituents. In actual fact, what he brought back was a fig leaf, a meaningless piece of paper. Now, it took a great deal of courage, I would say, for somebody like Gove and Johnson, who had been part of the Cameron circle, to actually say to him and Osborne, no, sorry, we don't agree, and we're going to campaign the other way. And it may be that we may not have even won that referendum if it hadn't been for the fact that the British people were shown that the cabinet was split and there were senior members of the cabinet who were prepared to take on Operation Fear which was being peddled by Mr. Cameron and Mr. Osborne. We recently had Priti Patel speaking at our association in Shrewsbury. She went down a storm.
Well, she's pretty sound, isn't she?
But she's very sound. And there are a few people who have that magnetism where they enter a room, people are interested. We had a huge number of people came, and this was at 2:00 in the afternoon. So this is on a Friday. This isn't sort of peak time when you can get people coming in to see a minister or former minister. 2:00 on the Friday afternoon, most people are at work. The room was packed, and this was in Shrewsbury, and she went down a storm, and people were still talking about her. You either have that sort of magnetism, which people are interested in your personality and your views and the way that you convey them and the way that you engage with them, either in the room or through television, or you don't. And I think in any generation there are just a handful of politicians who have that. Rees-Mogg is one of them. Priti Patel is one of them. And I'm very excited, and I hope that they will combine, and this is the critical thing, I hope that they will combine on a ticket when we do have an election for the leader, whenever the vacancy is, because I think they're very different figures, but they believe in similar things, and I think on the joint ticket, it would be very powerful, because you've got somebody who is the daughter of Indian migrants with somebody who went to Eton. It's a very interesting combination, a very interesting pair that could combine as leader and deputy leader, I would say. Yeah,
it's like a sort of chicken tikka masala with gold leaf on top or something like that.
Well, I'm not going to start comparing them to a particular meal.
Caviar. But I agree. That would be a dream ticket. But I'm told, and I wonder whether partly the attitude among Conservative MPs to Jacob Rees-Mogg is partly born of jealousy. A, they're jealous of his spine and his ideological principles, and B, they're envious of his intelligence. And they can't match that, therefore they write him off. But nevertheless, when I talk to Conservative MPs, they all say to me, pretty much, maybe apart from you, they say Rees-Mogg can never get elected because there just aren't enough votes within the party for him.
Well, I completely disagree, and I think you're absolutely right. Of course, they're jealous of his. Of course, there are many people who are jealous of his intellect. You only have to look at his speeches where he speaks without notes on some of the most complex constitutional matters and constitutional and economic and monetary and parliamentary issues, which he has an encyclopedic brain. And what was that word? Floxy, bloxy?
Oh, yes.
I mean, that just rolls off the tongue.
He knows how to... He's actually quite good at his media management, isn't he? He understands the media better, I think, than... I mean, as you mentioned, that the honourable gentleman for the 19th century... People who use that phrase don't realise they're actually adding to his lustre, his éclat. A lot of people respond to that and go, that's our Jacob.
But also, look at the way in which he... I've never actually seen him flustered or irritated or, I think, showing or being derisory or mocking others. He is coming across increasingly... And by the way, I'm a member of the European Research Group, which he chairs, and have regular meetings with him. But in any circumstance that you put him in, whether it's students shouting at him and being confrontational, whether it's on the floor of the House, whether it's on Question Time, where, quick as a flash, Dimbleby says to him, "Oh, well, you went to Eton, didn't you?" And he said, "Yeah, well, yes, I went there with your son."
Your son.
And the audience loved it.
Glorious moment.
There was a glorious moment because I think the British public, one thing I have learnt about the British, and I came here as a child, as a 6-year-old child from Poland in 1978. One thing I've learned about the British is that they won't judge you. They won't judge you necessarily on your background or your sexuality, or all of those things. They will always give you an opportunity for them to assess you without some form of negative, and what's it called, discrimination. They're very open and they're very tolerant. And what I think they're interested in is they're not interested in the sort of suit that you wear or how you speak or where you went to school or, all of those things that I think Mr. Blair so desperately tried to manage. They're interested in the narrative. They're interested in where are you going to take our country? What's your long-term vision? How are you going to create a strong partnership with Europe whilst ensuring that those things that we voted for are protected and we retain our sovereignty, we control our borders? Those are the things they're interested in. And they want somebody who will show that authenticity, but also who is prepared to fight. I remember how excited I was as a child in 1984. I was 12, and I remember watching Margaret Thatcher at Fontainebleau when she was renegotiating our rebate. My goodness me, I remember it as if it was yesterday. She went in there and she really took them on. She took them on and she said, we're getting this money back. This is British taxpayers' money back. We're paying too much money. You're taking too much away, and I am going to get that rebate. And people were very, very excited. Interestingly, when John Major, I remember having that same sense of excitement. And excitement and John Major don't normally, those two words aren't normally synonymous. But when John Major rejected the nomination of Jean-Luc Dehaene, the former Belgian Prime Minister, as the next EU president, we all got very excited about that. We thought, this is it. We're now reasserting our. Then, next thing we know, after 12 hours of excitement, next thing we know, he's accepted Monsieur Santerre from Luxembourg, who's even more federalist than Mr. Dehaene. So, have that ideology and stick to your principles and your core beliefs. That's what the British people want.
Yeah, but before we end this section, can you explain to me very briefly how it is possible for that Jacob and Priti Patel, say, if they were on a combined ticket, might get the... Because you need the vote of various MPs, don't you? Mm. So how are they going to do that?
Well, of course, there will be people there are. It depends who stands, but people are talking about Dominic Raab being a contender. That current housing minister, James Cleverly, is a name that's been mentioned. There are certain other people. I think it will be the next generation who win this.
Do you?
I do. I don't believe
it's going to skip Gove and Boris.
I think that Gove and Boris have had their time. I think that there is so much enthusiasm and energy for the next generation who have entered the House. I think that I'm pretty confident that it will go to one of them. So Dominic Raab is spoken about, James Cleverly is spoken about. There are one or two others, but I think creating a combo is an exciting prospect. At the last election, Stephen Crabb and Sajid Javid joined forces, and they were standing very clearly on a joint ticket. It was a joint ticket.
Right.
I like the idea of saying to the electorate, we're standing as a joint ticket, because then you are trying to appeal to more people within the parliamentary party, both on the personality basis, but also from an ideological perspective. And let's not forget, the deputy prime minister, I like the concept of a deputy prime minister and a deputy leader. I think that to have two personalities rather than one is a very important thing. It worked beautifully with Thatcher and Willie Whitelaw. That was a genuine partnership. That worked beautifully. It worked to a certain extent with Major and Heseltine. But if we could get an exciting couple at the next election to stand on a sort of joint a leader and deputy, I think that could be very exciting.
I hope you're right. You're listening to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very special guest, Daniel Kawczynski. In a moment.
Breitbart News Tonight with Joel Pollack and Rebecca Mansour.
A lot of people not knowing what action they could or should take to make the difference. What I do is try to turn people on to sites like Breitbart, people who are writing and publishing the truth so that people will get educated. But, you kind of can't blame productive members of society who are kind of confused, perplexed as to what do we do to take this government back.
Sirius XM Patriot Channel 125.
This is Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is James Delingpole.
Welcome back to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my special guest, Daniel Kawczynski, MP. Daniel, I was interested in what you were saying about polls, and are the polls like the English or not very?
Are they like the English? Oh no, my goodness me, very, very different.
Oh right.
Very different. I came here in 1978, and I remember at boarding school talking about Poland an awful lot. And this boy turned around to me in the canteen and said, well, if you like Poland so much, why don't you go back to Poland? And that stuck with me very, very much. And I have tried, I'm very proud of my Polish roots. But I think as a foreigner, and there are now 1 million Poles living in the United Kingdom, Polish is the second most spoken language in Britain after English.
Is that right?
Yes. Polish is now officially the second most spoken language. Prince William made that statement on a recent visit to Poland last year. The Poles make a huge contribution to our society. They feel very, very strongly about the Battle of Britain because the largest foreign contingent in the Battle of Britain were Poles. And at a dinner I recently attended with Lord Tebbit, who's a man who I respect greatly.
We loved Lord Tebbit.
Lord Tebbit said at this Anglo-Polish dinner at the RAF Club, he said something which I will never forget. He said, the Luftwaffe and the British Royal Air Force was so evenly matched in the summer of 1940, and of course it takes many years to train up a pilot, that the sudden arrival of these huge number of Polish pilots tipped the balance to the British side in the Battle of Britain. And of course it wasn't just the pilots that we sent over, it was also the main cryptographers at Bletchley were Polish. And the cryptographers who came, the Polish, are now commemorated at Bletchley for their contribution at that museum. So whether it was at Bletchley, whether it was over the skies of London in the Battle of Britain, whether it was in fact through the whole of North Africa where we fought with the British in Tobruk and through Libya and then up the spine of Italy.
You lot took Monte Cassino. And also you took that hill, you smashed the German army at the Falaise pocket.
Yes.
There was that. You got given all the really insane tasks because you were basically insane, weren't you?
Well, we were kamikaze.
Yeah,
because we were kamikaze, and the Gustav line, as it was called, which ran along the spine of Italy, which was that impregnable line which the Germans had created. Monte Cassino was at the very fulcrum of the Gustav line, and the Poles were given the one part of this impregnable defense line, which was the most ardent, and obviously climbing up this massive hill. The reason they won, and the reason why the Polish 303 squadron got shot down more enemy aircraft than any other squadron, is because they were kamikaze. They had lost their country. They had seen their country brutalized, destroyed. 90% of Warsaw was flattened, the city of my birth. Everything was taken away. Their womenfolk were being violated. Their houses were being burnt down. Their country had been pillaged. These men, they had hatred in their hearts because of what the Germans had done to Poland, but they had nothing to lose. They had already lost everything, whether it's their homes, the families. So yes, under those circumstances, they were determined that they were going to destroy fascism under whatever means they were given to their disposal. Yeah.
So, okay, so we've got kind of almost suicidally reckless courage. That is definitely a characteristic of the Poles. What else have you got that makes you Polish? What are the other characteristics?
I think we're a very emotional race. I think we're very emotional in the sense that also the Poland has that map there is Poland in 1600, 1700. It had a huge empire which stretched from the Baltic Sea down to the Black Sea. That was all destroyed, and Poland, of course, disintegrated and disappeared off the map, taken over by Russia, Germany, and the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. Don't forget, luckily for us in Britain, we're an island. We haven't been successfully invaded since 1066.
Did you fight the Turks? I imagine you.
We did.
You
and
did.
The Poles. It was actually the Poles who stopped the Turk at Vienna, a famous battle in Vienna. It was the Polish divisions that stopped the Turkish
in the
advance.
17th century.
Yes,
that one.
that stopped the advance of the Turks, and there was a very big battle near Vienna. It was the Polish forces who came down from Poland to stop the Turks. But
that's interesting.
They're
isn't
very
it?
emotive. Their country has been invaded so many times. And let's not forget about this, communism. I mean, the first time I went back to Poland was in 1983, March of 1983. And those childhood memories of going back to Poland, it's the closest thing. I mean, reading a book is one thing. George Orwell's Animal Farm, that's one thing. Actually going and living and experiencing what is authoritarian society communism was, I remember it so distinctly. Everything was rationed, no food in the stores, no petrol for cars.
Yes.
Each apartment building, when I used to go to see my beloved grandfather, we had to listen to the BBC World Service as quietly under his.
Oh, you remember this? You old enough?
Oh, I
yeah,
remember this. We used to listen to the BBC World Service with the volume turned down, with the curtains drawn, because in every apartment block there was an informer for the Communist Party on every level. And you never knew who the informer was. And it was illegal to listen to foreign radio stations. And so even simple things like that, even daring to challenge the communist dictator in any way publicly, either in writing or even demonstration, he would just disappear. And this is what really drove me to become a conservative politician. It was that hatred for communism, which admittedly is an extreme form of ideology, but I've seen what happens when the state is omnipotent, when the state has every single lever of economic production, when they control the press, when they control the lives and the habits of every individual, and the state has everything and the individual has nothing. And I will always fight against that. And today, Mr. Corbyn, you know, people used to laugh at me when I was first elected. I referred to the Labour Party as a socialist party. If you refer to the Labour Party as socialist in 2008, 2009, people would laugh at you and they say, don't be so ridiculous. Of course they're not socialists. This is a social democratic party. But today, we see the Labour Party becoming a socialist party.
Yeah.
He wants to nationalize the industries. He wants massive borrowing, to throw out all the fiscal prudence which is seeing us get back into the black. But he wants control. He believes in control from the centre, and he doesn't believe that individuals, whether they're in Shropshire or Manchester or wherever, that they should have the power to have economic freedom. He believes in the state having power. And I have seen what happens when the state has too much power.
Yeah. I'm sure that must be the reason why you are at the sounder end of the Conservative Party, because this has been my father-in-law is Bulgarian, so he too has an abiding hatred of communism, because he's seen what it does to a country. And and
by the way, may I just interrupt? What the proudest thing, the thing that I'm most proud of, is the fact that we are slowly, although not quickly enough in my view, but we are changing the taxation system to incentivize the individual, reducing corporation tax so that the person who has taken those risks and brave decisions to set up production of his own or whether it's the individual seeking to work, and they used to be taxed on after £6,000 per annum, everything was taxed. We've raised that up now to £11,500, and it's going up to £12,500. I want the state to be there to incentivize and support and nurture those people in our society who create the wealth. Who create the wealth. Mr. Corbyn's whole attitude, it seems to be, these people are there just to take the money away, to act as a cash cow for my big grand schemes, without realizing that the more money you take away from those entrepreneurs and those people who are taking risk, the less prosperity is actually created, which then the country shares out.
Although, I was telling you, wasn't I, before I on the way here, I was reading Hayek's Road to Serfdom on the train. And he makes the point that he was writing this in 1944, I think, and he said, look, okay, we can feel morally superior to what's happening in Nazi Germany and what's happening in Stalin's Soviet Union. But actually, these movements didn't come out of nowhere. And actually, the West generally, including America and Britain, were actually going on the path of socialism, which led to the fascism and communism, which are two sides of the same coin, that were causing the war that was happening at the time. What I'm saying to you is that, okay, you're pointing the finger at Jeremy Corbyn, and Corbyn is a threat. But at the same time, I see that soft socialism infecting the Conservative Party. It is not a party of classical liberals at the moment, and I really worry about it.
Absolutely, and there are people in our party who even, this week threatening and tabling, signing amendments to the EU withdrawal bill, wanting us to remain in the customs union. That is one of the most staggering and frightening things I've ever come across, because if there's one thing that should unite all strands of the Conservative Party, it should be the fundamental principle of respecting democracy.
Yeah.
That is the altar that everybody must respect. We had a referendum. People realized that by voting to leave the European Union, it inevitably, inextricably meant leaving the single market and leaving the customs union. You can't be in the European Union. You can't be a free sovereign nation state whilst being in the single market and the customs union. And of course there are people, and you know who they are, and your listeners know who they are, who want to thwart what the British people voted for. And I find that very, very dangerous. But let me just say one thing to you. There will be some of your listeners who maybe even voted Remain. And I
don't think so. I think we have a special rule on this podcast.
I would hope so. I would hope so. But let's say that some of them had been torn about the decision.
They might have been having an episode or something.
They may have been
psychotic episode.
Yeah, absolutely. But let me say this to you, or to them, I should say. This isn't something that we have just done on the whim. This referendum, as monumental as it is. The Poles came to see us here in 2003, and I want to get this on the record. And the strongman of the Polish Conservative Party came here, met Ian Duncan Smith, the then leader of the Conservative Party, and I was part of that meeting. As being a fluent Polish speaker, I was invited, and he said, "We want you to pull out of the EPP-ED group, because we don't believe that this receptacle for right-of-centre parties is an appropriate body, because it's full of federalist parties. We want you to create a new bloc as the biggest and most successful right-of-centre party in Western Europe. We want you to take the lead and to create a new bloc in the European Parliament, so that we can collectively combine and use our collective weight to take on the Franco-German federalist agenda." Ian Duncan Smith wasn't in a position to do anything, and I think a few months later there was a coup against him and he was deposed. Cameron then picks up the cudgels and actually does take us out of the EPP-ED group because of the pressure that was being put to bear on him by people like Bill Cash and others, great heroes of mine. Mm-hmm. He will go down in history, Bill Cash. So I went to the signing ceremony I think it was in George Street, Cameron with Mr. Topolánek, the then Czech Prime Minister, signing into being this new group. And we worked with the Czechs, with the Poles, with the Hungarians, with the Visegrad group, and we mentioned the Visegrad.
Yeah, we'll talk about them later.
We worked, and in order to form a new bloc in the European Parliament, there are strict European Union laws. In order to form an official bloc, you have to have a certain number of parties from a certain number of countries. And we worked with the Czechs and the Poles, and we created this bloc. And for a decade, we tried to work even with these like-minded sister parties to try to take on this federalist agenda, and even then we failed. So this is a very important thing, because for those people who say, you've just on the whim decided to pull us out of the European Union, no. We tried to prevent the whole situation from arising. We gave the opportunity to work with like-minded people to create what the British people always wanted, which is a trading bloc and cooperation through NATO for mutual defence, rather than the supranational state. We tried, it failed. Yeah. And that's why when Cameron came back after those renegotiations, visiting 27 European capitals, spending a year negotiating with them, when he came back with a fig leaf, that's when the penny dropped for me, and I suddenly realized, you know what? The fifth largest economy in the world, a country that's handed over, according to the House of Commons Library, £424 billion of British taxpayers into the EU coffers since we joined in 1972. A major military power, and the security of this continent is anchored in British military superiority.
Yeah.
And they won't even be prepared to even move an inch to accommodate some of the problems that we've had in terms of our concerns about increasing interference in our internal judicial processes and in the free movement of people, creating a housing crisis in our country. No, that was the time to leave.
Yeah.
And you know, I want a good relationship with the European Union, and we're going to go back to what I'm passionate about. I spend a lot of time on this. We're going to go back to that classic British bilateral relationship building with key strategic nations. We're not going to go through a middleman. Why do we need Brussels to tell us how to engage with Warsaw? No, we're going to work directly with these key countries in promoting a strong bilateral relationship as a sovereign nation state.
Yeah, but I can see, Daniel, your chances of promotion in this government are pretty minimal. I mean, you're
very small. I don't fit in. I don't.
You really don't.
I don't fit in at all. And in fact, I think in a very different way, because I'm a hybrid. I'm an Anglo-Pole, so I've got two very different cultures inside me. I think I'm actually at the moment reading more and more Polish literature and reading Polish magazines and listening to Polish television. I'm trying to immerse myself in both languages and both societies, and I want to, my dream is that in some way I can do something for Anglo-Polish relations.
I want to talk to you about that in the next part.
But I don't fit in. I don't fit in because and I reached the dizzy heights of being a parliamentary private secretary to the Secretary of State for Wales.
Oh, well done.
And I then said, look, I've had enough, and I want to leave because I think that they don't like it when you have views which are not in sync with the party leadership. And they think of you as being a little bit off message. But I think we ought to be encouraging that.
You're very off message in the party senior hierarchy, but I imagine in your constituency, which is, I mean, for those who don't know, Shropshire, Shrewsbury. Do you say Shrewsbury or Shrewsbury?
Well, I say Shrewsbury, but there are two ways of saying it. But look, these people are. Let me say something about the people of Shropshire, because when I was first standing to be to get on the candidates list, somebody said to me, a Conservative MP who will always remain nameless, said to me, "Well, we'll put you on the list, but that name, Kawczynski, I mean, you're never going to be elected with a name like that. It's you've got to change it
because they're all racist.
You've got to anglicise it. Nobody's going to vote for you."
Yeah.
And I said to him, "Well, in that case, I'm not going to stand. I'm very proud of my Polish ancestry. And there are many people who have come from abroad who have changed their names or anglicised their names. And it's a testament to the people of Shropshire that now they voted for somebody for the 4th time who not only was not born in Shropshire, but also was not born in this country. And when I was first being selected, somebody said to me, well, Kawczynski, it's not a very Shropshire name, is it? And how are you going to get on with a name like Kawczynski? And I said, well, it didn't cause my grandfather's generation any problems when they were fighting in the Battle of Britain. So I very much hope it won't cause me any problems today. And they cheered at that. And the Shropshire people are some of the best people in the world, but they're very, very kind and they're very tolerant, and they've been very supportive to me.
But they're quite old school in their politics. They don't take any... I bet they were Brexit, weren't they?
Yes, there were Brexit, but we had some arguments in my association because there were some people who were Remain. And of course, awful at night on referendum night is a bizarre situation where you're in a counting hall and half of your association are at one end of the hall and you're at the other.
That's weird.
Most of my association, would you believe, were Remain. And it's the only time in my 14-year career where I have been completely out of kilter with my association. And it was not a pleasant experience, but they were all very kind to me and tolerant, and we managed to get through it relatively unscathed. But you know, I'm from abroad, and I'm from abroad. Recently, I went to. I told them, I think it was 5 years ago. I said to them, you know, I've got a personal announcement to make to you. And I said, well, you know that I'm now divorced and I have a new partner, and it's a man. And there are 50 people in the audience there, they white, middle class, you know, and as if by magic, somebody stood up, a sort of current brigadier general type figure with a tweed jacket. Yeah. And he stands up and he says, well, I think that's marvellous, well done. And they all start to clap. And this is the British way, this is what I've learned. And that's why I say to you that British people are very tolerant. It's something that we must nurture and pass on to the next generation. The British are far more tolerant, I think, to other people, whether it's to do with their religion, their background, their sexuality, than many other countries in Europe. These are a special people on these islands. And I'm very, very proud of the fact that my daughter, who was born in Shropshire, has those same characteristics and attributes that, you know, so many British people have. I'm very proud of that.
You're listening to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my special guest, Daniel Kawczynski.
Breitbart News Tonight with Joel Pollack and Rebecca Mansour.
The real thing that the left is angry about is they're like, how could you allow these Russian memes? Somebody saw a meme and then they decided they had to vote for Trump. Or it must have been fake news. And by fake news, they mean conservative websites. Come on. But this is what the left thinks. Fake news. And by fake news, what they mean is shut down Breitbart.
Breitbart News Tonight. Weeknights starting at 9 p.m. East on Sirius XM Patriot 125.
This is Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is James Delingpole.
Welcome back to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very special guest, Daniel Kawczynski, MP. Daniel, being as you're a Pole, I want to run a theory by you. I think that Europe, the continent, is in deep, deep trouble right now. And I grew up in an age where, I mean, throughout my childhood, one looked across at this place called Eastern Europe, and one very rarely encountered Poles or Romanians or anything else. They were behind the Iron Curtain. And what one did know, I mean, I went to Berlin once and went across the border before the wall came down, and I saw the the guards on the platforms trying to stop East Germans escaping. And I saw that these were very grim places to live. It was clear that communism was a failed ideology and these people were suffering. Now, I look at Poland. My family's just been away to... they spent a week in Krakow, and they said it's cosmopolitan, it's thriving, craft beers, all sorts of groovy things happening there. I went to Cluj-Napoca the other day in Romania, which has got, I think, the fastest rising property in anywhere in Europe, because it's got 2 tech universities, and they are churning out these bright kids who are not snowflakes, who have not got fallen for any of that nonsense that British kids. So I'm looking across at Eastern Europe, former Eastern Europe now, and I'm also looking at their immigration policy. I'm looking at what's happening in Hungary and in Poland, and I'm thinking, in 20 or 30 years' time, these places are going to be a haven, whereas the rest of Europe will have been... I think the terrorism is going to increase. I think there's going to be a tremendous integration problem, and I think it's going to be bordering on civil war. Your lot, your ex-lot, are going to be safe. Is that a fair analysis?
Well, this is a fascinating question, if I may say so. And but let me, just before I answer that specifically, let me just say to you also that we're leaving the European Union just at the right time.
Yeah.
And also, what really impresses me about the British people is that there are only 2 nationalities in the whole of the European Union project where the people themselves said, no, we are not going to abandon our currency. Denmark and Britain are the only 2 countries with a permanent opt-out. Now, the British people were extremely clever when they decided in 2001, 2002, when this issue was being raised, it was the British people who said, no, we are not going to abandon our currency, because if this project doesn't work out, and if it moves off into a sort of sphere that we're not happy with, it will be much more difficult to extricate ourselves from this project if we have the same currency. So it's the British people who saved this country at that time. Now, interestingly, Poland, of course, there are 6 countries that are not part of the Eurozone but are contractually obliged to join. And I'm not going to name all of them, I'll probably forget, but Poland, Czech Republic, Sweden, Romania, Bulgaria, and there's one more, which I can't remember.
Not Hungary.
Hungary. So these are the same countries that you've just identified.
Isn't that funny?
And they are the ones who, at the moment, the next huge battle ahead of us in the European Union will be this battle over the currencies. Because what they're going to now say to Poland is, that's it. You're contractually obliged, you've got to ditch your currency and join the euro. And in the opinion polls in Poland today, all the opinion polls, the adoption of the euro has about a 15% support in the opinion polls. Poles are overwhelmingly opposed to ditching their own currency. They see their economy growing at the moment at 4.3% per annum. They are currently net recipients of EU funds, but if their economy continues to grow at the pace that it has done over the last decade, they will be net contributors to the budget within the next 5 years, particularly accentuated by the fact that the European Union is going to lose 20% of their revenue when the United Kingdom leaves in 2009. So it's going to be a huge battle. And I will return to Poland one day when they do ultimately have a referendum, and I will campaign in that referendum in Poland to try to prevent the zloty from being got rid of. Because this is a huge battle. We are moving towards, if they can bludgeon these 6 countries into abandoning their currencies, then there will only be one country with a permanent opt-out, yes. Denmark. And then they will come to Copenhagen and say, you thought you had a permanent opt-out. Well, of course, that's not reasonable now because there are 27 members and you're the only one, so you're going to have to adopt the euro. So then we've got the main plank of a supranational state, a single currency, a single parliament. Mr. Juncker has said that he wants his legacy to be a single president. So you've got all the various attributes, and then they want to create a single European army. Now, James, you will know that the United Kingdom suffered enormously as a result of the First World War. I could take you to many memorials in Shropshire where the creme de la creme of young men were killed in the First World War in the trenches. Same again in the Second World War. Because of our treaty obligations with Poland, we had to go. We've only just paid off our debts from the Second World War 6 years ago, as you know. So Britain, for Britain, it's extremely important that we have peace and security on the continent of Europe, because inevitably we will be dragged into another war on the continent of Europe if one develops. And what frightens me about the European Union more than anything else, James, is that they want to create a single European army. The European Union has the opposite of the Midas touch.
It does.
Anything that it touches turns to dust rather than gold. So whether it's the immigration situation, which has been badly handled from Syria, whether it's the Eurozone crisis, whether it's Greece, whether it's rampant youth unemployment in Spain, this is not a body that I have a lot of confidence in. And for them to try to now take over the defense of the continent of Europe would be catastrophic. I'm going to name to you now the 6 countries that are inextricably linked to the common defense of our continent, which are not members of the European Union. And I'm sure they're all indelibly imprinted on your mind. America, Canada, Iceland, Norway, Turkey, and the United Kingdom as of next March. Hugely important countries. Look at Turkey. Our whole southern flank is protected by Turkey. Very important NATO partner. What would happen if, with ISIS in Syria and Iraq, if it wasn't for the protection that we get from Turkey? Look at Norway in the Arctic, bordering the Soviet Union. Look at America, the world's only superpower, the United Kingdom. Those 6 countries are inextricably linked to the common defense of our continent, and we need a system whereby these countries continue to be part of that common defense posture. A single European army, at best, will duplicate the work of NATO, and at worst, it will usurp the supremacy of NATO, something which would be catastrophic for this country and catastrophic for our continent, because not a single square inch of NATO territory has been successfully seized since its inception. This is an organization that works, and by the way, we are losing a certain amount of our sovereignty by being members of NATO. You know as well as I do, if Poland was invaded tomorrow by Russia, we would have no choice but to go to her defense.
Yeah.
We've lost a bit of sovereignty there because we can't make a decision on that. We are bound by that collective responsibility. NATO works, and the European Army project, and I've heard people in Brussels say, we can't trust the British and we can't trust the Americans to come to our aid. We need a single European army. That would be a disaster. Now, I had to get that off my chest, because this is a huge battle ahead of us, and it's not just enough for us to save ourselves. What we are doing is sometimes it's like tiptoeing through a minefield, extricating yourself out of the European Union. But we're on virgin territory. But what we're doing, and Britain has always led the way in Europe, always showed the courage and conviction in order to challenge stereotypes and perceived long-term strategy. What we're doing is we're laying out a breadcrumb, we're laying out a path with breadcrumbs for other nations to follow. And when a country like Poland or Czech Republic, when they see this country thriving outside of the European Union, which inevitably it will, released from the shackles of regulation, protectionism, regulations, all of those things, this country is going to thrive outside. When they see that, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year, but in 10, 15 years' time, others will want to be like us, and that's a huge, huge debate and challenge, and we must be part of that debate, because we want strong, independent, sovereign nation states, if they want to be sovereign and independent, and collaborating through NATO, which is a very important defence posture.
Well,
now, let me just very
yeah.
briefly say about your immigration point, which is hugely important. The Poles are attacked by the European Union, increasingly so. The European Union now wants to not only punish them with sanctions, but also invoke Article 7, strip them of their voting rights, all sorts of things, because they're not prepared to take a certain number of Syrian refugees. But that's not where the interference stops, James. They are now, the Polish government is making changes to the Constitutional Court and the judiciary. And would you believe there are still judges in Poland that were appointed during the communist era, and it's one of the largest and yet most inefficient judiciaries in the whole of Europe. The European Union are now interfering and challenging the democratically elected Polish government in making internal changes to its own judiciary. They're even trying to penalise Poland for cutting down trees in the national forest. The Polish government says that there is a bug eating away at these trees, and they want to create windbreaks to save the other trees. The European Union is saying, no, it's illegal and you won't be allowed to do it, and we will fine you if you do it. Whether it's to do with something microscopic like the management of your national forest, whether it's to do with changes to the judiciary, which, by the way, you had in your manifesto, which the Polish people voted for and supported,
Yeah.
or whether it's to do with taking in immigrants, which, by the way, the Polish government believes quite rightly so, that they will decide who comes into their country, and they will make those decisions for themselves. And by the way, please don't forget, the Poles have played a hugely important role in helping hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian refugees who have flooded across the border because of the fighting in eastern Ukraine. Go to Warsaw now. Estimates put it that 1 million Ukrainians have come to live and work in Poland, and a lot of effort has been going into helping them and resettle in Poland. So it's not that Poland has just said, no, we're not prepared to take any refugees. They have instinctively wanted to help their neighbour, who also happened to be in a very difficult and confrontational and ongoing war with Russia. And they've managed to accommodate 1 million Ukrainians. But the European Union is now threatening them. And the only reason they can't impose sanctions is that Poland's erstwhile long-term ally, and there are many, I'm not going to go into all the historical reasons for this, but there's a very strong bond between Hungary and Poland, going back centuries.
Well, going back, I imagine, to a certain common enemy.
Going back to a common enemy. But the Hungarians have said that they will, because it's done by qualitative majority voting, Budapest has said, you try to do this to the Poles, we're going to veto it.
Excellent.
Which is great. But it's a huge battle ahead of them. And the Poles and the Hungarians and the Czechs, they're going to take these Brussels bureaucrats on and say, no, sorry, we will decide who comes into our country. That's very, very important.
Well, what recourse does the EU ultimately have? Are they going to try and threaten to expel them? I mean, if you're Poland or Hungary or whatever, and you say, sorry, mate, not taking in any of these refugees, as you want to call them, what can the EU do to force them?
Well, you know what the EU actually I'm going to say something even more off message, which you will like.
Good.
Where, why is it that all of a sudden there was this very large scale flow of immigrants from Syria?
Merkel, surely.
I will tell you what my theory is. But what happened is that, and we must predicate this on a very important factor. Britain has acted more responsibly in this debacle than any other European country. Why? Because she has spent £2.5 billion of taxpayers' money on protecting people on the ground in their own area.
Yes.
Camps in Jordan. You go, and I've had the opportunity of seeing this. You go to those refugee camps in Jordan. The huge amount of British taxpayers' money has been spent in ensuring that there is adequate provision of schools, hospitals, basic equipment, sanitation, both in Jordan and in Lebanon And the British have helped these refugees so that when the fighting stops, and when Syria ultimately is safe, they can return to their country. Syria otherwise will be a desert, an economic, cultural and entrepreneurial desert. Some of the best people have obviously fled that.
The most energetic.
The most energetic have fled, the doctors, dentists, academics. And it's very, very important. Of course, it's easy to say, look, we're going to open up our borders. Let everybody who wants to come in, come in. But in actual fact, what you're long term, what you're doing is you're creating potentially a situation where that country will just become a desert and more susceptible to nefarious groups trying to destabilize it in the future. So I think it's very, very important that we respect these countries and how they manage it. I mean, I reckon the incompetence, and I when I was on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, we met with President Erdogan, and I challenged them. This was the time of the crisis, and I said, your borders, your coastline is like a Swiss cheese. It's so porous. You've got no control of your borders. Yeah. But what they did is, I think what they did is they just opened the tap.
Yeah, of course they did.
And what they said is, you are being unreasonable with us, i.e. all those negotiations between Europe. Europe promised, the European Union promised Turkey £2 billion to help them deal with the huge influx of Syrian refugees. Yeah. This is the monster that is Brussels. Yeah. They then reneged on that deal and gave the Turks, I think, you'll have to check this out, but rather than 2 billion, they gave them something like 250 million.
That's good diplomacy, isn't it?
So I think you'll have to check, don't take my word for it, look these figures up yourself. So what the Turks said is, right, okay, we'll just open the tap up and we'll see how you cope with these huge numbers of people coming. Because if you're going to tell us one thing and do something else, we'll let you deal with the problem. And so I think a very important aspect of this crisis is supporting people on the ground in Lebanon and Jordan, but also negotiating effectively with Turkey. Yeah. Because the European Union has dangled membership of the EU in front of Turkey for decades, and they actually treat the Turks with a great degree of being patronizing towards them and not treating them as equal partners. I've actually, although we have concerns about certain things that are taking place in Ankara, I still think that Turkey is a very important country and we need to work with them collaboratively.
Interesting. Before we go, we've only got like a tiny amount left, but I know that you're a massive fan of Saudi Arabia, and you've been castigated for this by some people. And I have to say, from my limited knowledge, I'm very excited about the new Crown Prince and about what he's doing. It seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, and you're probably going to say yes because you're going to agree with me, but
very good question.
But it seems to me that he is taking the sting out of Islam. I mean, he after all is in charge of Mecca, so he controls one of the two great halves of Islam, Sunni Islam, and if he is saying to Sunni Muslims, it is possible to be a Muslim and yet be compatible with Western civilization. You don't have to kind of be at war with it all the time. My goodness, that is going to be the best. He's going to be the best leader in the world, isn't he?
Well, that's a brilliant question. He's 32 years of age, and he's from a completely different generation to the previous octogenarians that we've been dealing with on our numerous visits to Saudi Arabia. Look, I have taken my interest in Saudi stems from the fact that when I was in business in the telecommunications industry, I spent quite a bit of time in the Middle East, and Saudi Arabia in particular. And I'm fascinated by Saudi because of its importance within the Middle East, the custodian of the two holy mosques, but also the strategic partnership and alliance that Britain has had with this very important partner of ours, and the relationship which is being built up over generations. We now have, as you know, James, the first time we've had in my lifetime a permanent naval base in the Gulf, in Bahrain. And that is extremely important because the British naval base in Bahrain is a tripwire for any potential conflict between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Any war between Iran and Saudi Arabia would not only shut off potentially the Strait of Hormuz, through which something like 30% of the world's oil flows, which would lead to catastrophic damage to the British economy. And these are things that we have to think about as British politicians.
Well, especially given we've nixed fracking pretty much.
Well, yes.
I mean, imagine if we'd gone all out for fracking like in America with the Boland Shale and stuff.
Well, I don't disagree with you, and I think that some of the restrictions on fracking have been very, very illiberal and predicated on misinformation.
Yeah.
And I'm against that. But so the energy security is very important. But look, you see, every member of parliament that I've taken to Saudi radically changes their views about the country because they actually go there. The most anti-Saudi people are the ones who have never actually been to the country.
So have you met the new guy?
Oh yes, I met him when he was in London.
And what do you think?
Well, look, he's 32. He's from a very different generation. He's making huge changes to the society. The previous king, King Abdullah, when I challenged him on why Christians weren't allowed to worship in the country, why we weren't allowed to have churches, why women couldn't drive, he said, I can only move at this pace of the most conservative elements in my society, so that the reforms that we're proposing are embedded and sustainable and will actually, come to fruition. This new king has thrown a lot of that caution to the wind, and some of the changes are really radical. There are now more women in further education in Saudi than men. They make up 30% of the Saudi parliament, the Shura Council. When I first went to Saudi in 2006, there were no women in the Shura Council. Things are really, really changing. Now, is it still a conservative society? Do they still have more to do in terms of reform? Of course they do. But my whole principle of foreign policy is, do we just castigate a country and condemn them and have nothing to do with them? Or do we try to get to know them and build relations of trust and mutual respect, so then we can influence them and work together? And as a man who's in the same-sex relationship, whenever I go to Saudi Arabia, the one big thing that's still outstanding for us is that homosexuality is really punished and criminalized. And
it's a capital offence, isn't it?
Yes, and we talk about these things all the time, and they know that I have a male partner, and when we go out there, we challenge them on these things all the time. But go to a road in Saudi, go to downtown Riyadh. We escape from our minders and ministers and royal meetings, and we go. The most important thing is we go into downtown Riyadh and we meet with ordinary people. Go to the parks. All the children are wearing Manchester United T-shirts. They're
and are all the girls wearing headscarves? Presumably they have to.
Yes, they are, but things are changing, and I've been to now, on my recent visit to Saudi, they are driving cars, and sometimes, Jeddah is much more liberal, for example, than Riyadh. But the country is changing, and it's reforming. And we have a very, very important strategic alliance with them. And we influence them in many, many different ways. We work on counter-terrorism together. Our security agencies are cooperating with one another. So, look, let's put that into perspective. And by the way, I'm happy to take the brickbats from wanting to engage with Saudi, because I know it's unpopular, but then politicians who only do popular things are really letting the electorate down, because we need a proper, healthy debate on all our bilateral relationships and foreign policy.
That's a good ending, I think. You're listening to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very special guest, Daniel Kawczynski, MP. Thank you and goodbye.